Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tale, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now let's get into today's tale. At my sister's wedding, my son's plate was swapped with a bowl of dog food. It's just a prank. My sister giggled. My son looked down in confusion. A waiter snorted. Dogs eat at this table. My cousins spit out her wine from laughing. Then my father stood and slapped his napkin down. I won't stay for this, Luca. What's wrong with your food? I asked him, leaning closer across the long white draped table. He blinked at me, puzzled, then looked down again. It smells funny, Mom, before I could say anything else, as nickering. Waiter leaned in and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Dogs eat at this table." At that moment, my cousin Marissa burst out laughing, wine spraying from her mouth from the head table. My sister Sierra giggled, her voice carrying over the chatter. "Lighten up, Harper, it's just a prank." My father stood up so fast his chair screeched across the polished floor. He slapped his napkin on the table. "I won't stay for this," he barked, his voice shaking, and just like that, I realized my family wasn't what I thought it was. Maybe it never had been. The wedding was at the Biltmore Estate in Asheville. If you've ever been there, you know it's all towering stone and sweeping lawns like a misplaced castle dropped into North Carolina. It was exactly the kind of showy, expensive place my sister Sierra had always dreamed of getting married. Sierra was 3 years younger than me, but sometimes it felt like she was decades behind emotionally. She was always the one pulling pranks, making jokes at other people's expense, and somehow getting away with it. Our parents would brush it off. "That's just Sierra being Sierra," they'd say. Meanwhile, I was the one told to keep the peace, to be understanding. When she got engaged to Drew, I wanted to believe she was growing up. I really did. I bought Luca a little navy suit. I bought a new dress I couldn't exactly afford. I even agreed to help organize parts of the bridal shower. Part of me hoped this big grown-up step would settle her down. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Sierra looked stunning, her dress trailing behind her on the marble steps. Luca held my hand during the vows, small fingers warm and fidgety. In mine, everything felt normal, even a little magical. But then came the reception. At first, nothing seemed off. We were assigned to table 12, tucked toward the back of the room. It didn't surprise me too much. Sierra always had a way of ranking people in her mind, and I guess we weren't top tier, whatever I was. Therefore, Luca not for some imaginary social status. The food was being served. Platters of beautiful salmon, roast chicken, and vegetables floated past us. The waiters moving in a careful, choreographed dance, and then they set Luca's plate down. It wasn't food. It was a metal dog bowl, a real one filled with sloppy canned dog food. The smell hit first, sharp and nauseating. Luca blinked at it, in confusion, his little face screwing open concentration as he tried to make sense of it. That's when the waiter leaned down and said that horrible line, "Dogs eat at this table." There was a burst of laughter. Marissa's wine sprayed everywhere. People were nudging each other, chuckling under their breath. And up at the head table, Sierra was practically falling out of her chair, giggling. I froze. I could feel the blood rushing too. My face, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached for Luca, pulling his plate away instinctively, shielding him without even thinking. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, hurt blooming across his little features like a bruise. My father, who had been sitting stiffly at the other end of the table, stood up so violently that the table shook. He slapped his napkin onto his plate. "I won't stay for this," he growled, his voice shaking with anger. And just like that, he turned and walked out. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Luca's hand and followed behind us. I could hear the ripple of murmurs, a few nervous laughs, trying to paper over the awkwardness. I didn't look back outside. My father was standing by his car, his hands shaking. Ash lit a cigarette. He hadn't smoked in years. "Not since the heart attack. I'm sorry," he said harshly. Not looking at me, I should have seen this coming. Luca clung to my waist, confused, scared. Smoothed his hair back from his forehead, murmuring something I can't even remember what, trying to soothe him, trying to anchor myself. That night after I put Luca to bed, I sat alone on the couch, staring at my phone as the messages started rolling in. Some family members, the ones who had laughed, sent half-hearted texts. "You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Don't ruin the family over this." Others quietly, privately messaged me things like, "I'm so sorry, that wasn't right. We should have spoken up." And then from Sierra herself, "You ruined my wedding. You made it all about you like always." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The days turned into weeks. I didn't go to family dinners. I didn't send Sierra a birthday card. I didn't bring Luca around for Easter. The family split down, invisible lines, some stayed neutral, pretending nothing had happened, some quietly took sides, mostly siding with me, but not loudly enough to cause themselves trouble. Sierra sent a few more texts over the next few months, apologies that weren't apologies. I'm sorry, you're so sensitive, it was just a joke, everyone laughed. You need to lighten up. But the thing was, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for cutting someone out, thought about Luca, about how he had looked at me. That night, confused and hurt, wondering why the grown-ups were laughing at him, and I made a decision: if protecting him meant burning bridges, then let them burn in the months after the wedding. I found myself replaying everything over and over. Not just the wedding night, but years and years of things I'd brushed off, forgiven, overlooked. Sierra stole my diary in high school and read it out loud to her friends. Sierra accidentally tore my prom dress while pretending to admire it. Sierra laughed when I got dumped by my first boyfriend, making up cruel nicknames for me behind my back each. Memories settled on my shoulders, like stones piling higher until I could barely move under the weight for so long. I had told myself that it was normal, that family was messy, and loyalty meant forgiving everything. But watching Lucas sitting quietly at the kitchen table one night, scribbling absent-mindedly in his coloring book, I realized I would never want him to accept that kind of treatment from anyone, even family. Especially family therapy became my lifeline. I found Dr. Alvarez through a friend. Her office was tucked into the second floor of a converted Victorian house downtown, all worn wooden floors, and the smell of old books and coffee. The first few sessions were hard. I had gotten so good at minimizing my own experiences that it felt alien to say them out loud. She humiliated your child in front of a crowd, Dr. Alvarez said, simply after I stammered through the wedding story. That's not a prank, that's cruelty. Hearing it said so plainly, without any hedging or excuses made, something inside me crack open. I cried. In her office for the first time in years, we talked about boundaries, about how keeping the peace was often just another way of abandoning myself, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people you're responsible for is to walk away. Meanwhile, Sierra didn't seem to understand why I was staying silent. She posted pictures online, curated moments of smiling brunches with friends, new haircuts, inspirational quotes about forgiveness and family every once in a while. She'd send a text, short, sharp little jabs wrapped in faux concern. Hope Luca is okay. Maybe if you weren't so dramatic we could talk. Still waiting for an apology for storming out of my wedding. I never answered. The silence between us stretched longer and longer, a canyon that neither of us seemed willing or able to cross. I didn't miss her the way I thought I would. Sometimes I missed the idea of a sister, the fantasy version I had clung to for so long. But the real Sierra, I didn't miss walking on eggshells. I didn't miss waiting for the next sharp comment disguised as humor. One afternoon, about 6 months after the wedding, my mother called. I was thinking of doing a family barbecue this summer, she said, her voice overly bright. You know, to bring everyone back together. Heal old wounds. I could hear the hope in her voice, the desperate need for things to return to normal. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, trying to be gentle. Oh, come on, Harper. It's been long enough. You have to move on. Eventually move on, like it was that easy. Like Luca's hurt. My hurt was just bruises that faded. If you ignored them long enough. I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Mom, I said carefully, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting Luca and myself. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. I just don't want to lose my family, she whispered. I softened a little. I understood her fear. But at the same time, I couldn't go back to the way things were then. Maybe the family needs to change, I said quietly. The invitations went out anyway, a barbecue at my parents' house just like the old days. Everyone was invited, no boundaries, no restrictions. I knew Sierra would bether for weeks. I agonized over it. Should I go? Would staying away just make things worse? Was I teaching Luca the right thing by keeping us apart from the family? Or was I teaching him to run from conflict? In the end, I decided we'd go, but with rules. I told Luca beforehand. If anything felt wrong, if anyone said anything unkind, we would leave immediately, no second chances, no explanations. He nodded solemnly, taking it in with the quiet seriousness kids can sometimes show. He trusted me. I am show Couldn't betray that the day of the barbecue was bright and stiflingly hot. My parents' backyard looked almost exactly the same as when I was a kid. The faded blue picnic tables, the rickety swing set my dad had built 30 years ago. Burgers sizzled on the grill, kids shrieked and splashed in a blow-up. Pool adults clumped together in pockets of small talk and beer. Sierra was already there when we arrived. She wore oversized sunglasses and a tight, too bright smile. Her posture was stiff, defensive like she was, bracing for a hit that hadn't come, yet I nodded politely at her from across the lawn. She raised a hand halfway, then let it drop. It was civil tense, but civil for a while. It almost felt normal. Luca played with some second cousins he barely knew, chasing bubbles and kicking a soccer ball around. I chatted with my uncle, who reminisced about old camping trips. My dad flipped burgers with the same concentration he'd had my entire life, and then Sierra approached. She waited until I was alone, refilling my lemonade. "Harper," she said, her voice low but urgent, "we need to talk." I turned to face her fully, the coldness between us palpable. "Okay," I said. Simply, she shifted awkwardly, picking at her cuticles. I know I messed up," she said finally, "but you blew it way out of proportion. It was supposed to be funny. People prank kids all the time." I stared at her, waiting. Sierra looked uncomfortable, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. "They made me feel like crap too, you know," she said, voice sharpening after. "You left," Drew's mom said. "I was cruel and immature. People were talking about me like I was some monster. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry for how it made her look." I kept my voice calm. "Myson isn't a prop for your jokes. Saeed's a person, and you humiliated him." Sierra's eyes flashed with something, anger, embarrassment. "I wasn't sure I said I messed up," she snapped. "What more do you want?" I didn't answer right away because the truth was I didn't want anything from her anymore. Not an apology, not a relationship, nothing. I just wanted peace. I must have paused too long because Sierra's face twisted like she was about to say something ugly, but before she could, Luca came running up, breathless from playing, holding a paper plate with a slightly burnt burger on it. "Mom, look. I got my own food," he said, proudly, cheeks flushed from the heat. I smiled at him, ruffling his hair. "Good job, buddy." Sierra stared at him, and something flickered across her face, something complicated, maybe regret, maybe resentment. Then she forced a tight smile, crouching awkwardly to Luca's level. "Hey, Luca," she said, her voice too sweet. "No hard feelings, right? About the wedding?" Luca froze. He looked up at me first, instinctively, checking if he was safe. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was seething. Luca shifted from foot to foot. "I didn't like it," he said simply. Sierra's fake smile faltered. "Well, you know, sometimes grown-ups just joke around," she said, glancing around nervously again, as if the air itself might turn on her. "You'll get it when you're older." Luca said nothing. He just turned and walked back to the picnic table where the other kids were eating, leaving Sierra crouched there, blinking at his retreating back. I didn't say a word. I didn't owe her an explanation. For me son's honesty, Sierra straightened up, brushing invisible dirt off. Her jeans, her mouth tightened like she was holding back something nasty, but this time she swallowed it down without another word. She turned and stalked off across the yard, joining a cluster of aunts and uncles who immediately wrapped her into the conversation. Pretending not to have seen any of it, the rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I felt like I was moving underwater, hyper-aware of every glance, every tight smile, every fake laugh floating on the humid summer air. I hated that this was what family had become, a tightrope walk across an old minefield, pretending everything was fine. While everyone quietly resented each other for the things no one dared to say out loud. At one point, my mother sidled up next to me while I was helping Luca get a second slice of watermelon. "She's trying, Cassandra," she murmured, not looking at me. I didn't answer because trying wasn't enough, because when someone sets fire to something important, you don't hand them more matches just because they tried to say sorry afterward. The sun dipped low in the sky. The kids' laughter turned drowsy, the grill smoke thinning to ghostly wisps. People started packing up, hugging, exchanging promises to get together soon that we all knew were lies. I was gathering our things. Empty Tupperware, Luca's soggy sneakers, the picnic blanket. When my father came over, he didn't say much, just looked at me with those tired eyes of his, the same ones that had watched me fall off swings and win spelling bees and get my heart broken. "I'm proud of you, kid," he said, clapping me gently on the back for standing up. Nearly broke me because for so long I'd thought I was the problem, too sensitive, too serious, too unwilling to take a joke, and now standing there with Luca buzzing around me, my arms full of sticky plates and half-deflated balloons. I realized I wasn't broken for having boundaries. I was finally whole as we loaded into the car. Luca yawned wide, enough to crack his jaw. "Mom," he said sleepily from the back seat as I buckled him in, "are we still going to come to these family things?" His voice was innocent, curious, not bitter, just wondering. I thought about it for a long moment, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Well, go where people treat us with kindness," I said, "where we feel safe." He nodded, accepting that without argument, already drifting off as I closed the car door, driving home the road stretching out in front of us. I felt something shift inside me again, a deep, slow settling. Not anger, not sadness. Just a quiet understanding that some doors don't close with a slam, they just drift shut slowly and completely until you realize you've already stepped away from them without even noticing. The barbecue wasn't a disaster. Not exactly. There were no screaming matches, no plates thrown across the yard, but when I looked around at the tight smiles and stiff shoulders, I realized it was a different kind of disaster, the quiet kind, where everyone pretends hard enough that they almost forget. They're pretending. A few days later, I started hearing little things from my mother, how Sierra had been crying a lot lately, how she said she felt abandoned by her family, how she wished things could just go back to the way they were. I didn't respond much. I didn't argue or explain. I didn't get pulled into the old cycle, off fixing Sierra's feelings at the expense of my own. I had learned something new. You don't owe people access to you just because they miss the version of you that let them hurt you. Luca started 3rd grade that fall. He grew taller, faster, more confident. He joined the swim team. He tried out for the school play at night. We read books on the couch, the dog asleep at our feet, the windows open to the cool mountain air. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. Who's just peaceful. And after years of drama, peace felt like the most precious thing in the world. Meanwhile, Sierra drifted further into the edges of the family at Thanksgiving. She showed up late, left early, and barely spoke to anyone at Christmas. She sent a group text instead of coming at all birthdays. Passed with curt messages and no real connection. I saw photos online, sometimes nights out with people. I didn't know captions about fake friends and trust no one. Passive-aggressive memes about family who cuts you off for reason. I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I didn't reach out. It was tempting. Sometimes in the quiet hours after Luca went to bed, to wonder if I was being cruel, but then I would remember that day at the wedding. Luca's face as he looked down at that bowl of dog food, the way his little body shrank in confusion and shame, and I would remember exactly why. The distance was necessary. Some things you forgive privately, but never forget some boundaries you set not out of hate, but out of love. Fierce, protective love. The next Corin storm hit about a year after the wedding. My mother called again, voice thin and strained. Sierra had been evicted from her apartment. Apparently, after missing several months' rent, she was staying temporarily with a friend, but it wasn't going well, and now she wanted to come home, move back in with my parents until she got back on her feet. She's had a hard time. My mother said carefully, as if picking her words might change how I reacted. She's really struggling, Harper. I listened in silence, waiting, and maybe my mother sighed hesitantly. You and Luca could reach out, let her know she's still part of the family. There was again that heavy, aching expectation that I would be the bridger, that I would make the first move, that I would pretend the past didn't happen because it was easier for everyone else if I did. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly. No, I said quietly. Not doing that. My mother exhaled sharply, hurt. She's still your sister. She's still the person who humiliated my son. In front of a room full of people, I said, the calmness in my voice surprising even me, and who never really apologized for it, more silence, heavy, accusing. You're being cruel, my mother said finally, her voice trembling. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. I'm being clear, I said. There's a difference. The call ended without resolution. I sat on the couch afterwards, staring at the muted TV screen, feeling that old guilt stir like a ghost inside me. But then Luca wandered out of his room, rubbing his eyes and climbed into my lap without a word. He tucked his head under my chin, warm and solid and safe, and I knew it down to my bones that I was making the right choice, even if nobody else saw it yet. In the weeks that followed, I heard bits and pieces through. The family grapevine. Sierra did move back in with my parents. Wasn't going well. There were fights. About money, about jobs she didn't keep, about expectations she couldn't meet. Some of the family started distancing themselves too, not because of me, but because Sierra's chaos bled into everything, now impossible to ignore. It was strange watching from a distance, for so long Sierra had been the center of the family's orbit, and now she was burning through her own bridges without my help at all. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate, I just stayed quiet, stayed safe. Sometimes my mother would call slipping bits of Sierra's misery into casual conversation like bait on a hook. I didn't bite sometimes. Sierra herself would send clipped bitter texts once. She even sent a photo of an old family Christmas, us both. Smiling in matching pajamas, no caption, just a memory dropped into my lap like a grenade. I didn't answer. I didn't engage. Some wars aren't worth fighting anymore. The distance between Sierra and the rest of the family grew with every month she stayed at my parents' house. The arguments got louder. The excuses are thinner. I heard through my father, quietly over coffee one morning, that Sierra had tried and failed at 3 jobs in 6 months, that she spent most of her time online railing about fake friends and bad bosses, that every disagreement turned into a full-blown scene. She hasn't changed, he said wearily, stirring his coffee. She just got louder about blaming everyone else. I nodded but didn't say anything. I wasn't interested in being dragged back into the orbit of someone who thrives on chaos. I have carved out a good life. Now better than good, the little bookstore cafe I had dreamed of for years had finally opened in downtown Asheville, tucked into a bright corner lot near the river. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. Luca helped me stock shelves after school, stacking colorful kids' books and sipping hot chocolate behind the counter. The customers were kind. The days were peaceful. Our world felt small but solid, a soft place to land in a world that had often felt sharp and cold. It wasn't there. Venge I had planned, it wasn't there. Venge I had wanted, but sometimes the best revenge is just living well. Sierra found out about the bookstore when my mother mentioned it offhandedly. I could almost feel the spike of her resentment. Through the phone lines a week later, she showed up at the shop. I was behind the counter organizing receipts when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, and there she was. Sierra stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable, out of place. Her clothes hung differently now. A little cheaper, a little more tired. There was a wild, desperate edge to her smile. "Hey," she said, "nice place." I wiped my hands on a towel and walked around the counter, heart thutooing calmly. Solidly, not with fear, not with rage, just steady, clear-headed acceptance. "Thanks," I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. There was a long, heavy pause. She shuffled forward a few steps, looking around the cozy, sunlit space. The walls are lined with books the tables were full of, people reading and chatting softly, the little life I had built without her. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice brittle, "maybe I could help out here, work a few shifts, get back on my feet." She smiled like she thought it was obvious, like we were still close enough, that she could just slot herself back into my life for a moment. The weight, fall the years pressed down on me. The fights, the tears, the endless forgivenesses that had cost me pieces of myself. I thought about Luca, safe and happy in the back room sorting bookmarks by color. I thought about the peace I had fought so hard to earn, and I smiled, polite but distant. "We're fully staffed," I said simply, "and we're doing just fine." Sierra's face faltered, her mouth opened slightly, like she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Like it had never even occurred to her that I might say, "No." She tried again. "I could volunteer. Maybe just help out until things get better." Hook my head, gentle but firm. "We're good, Sierra." For a second, anger flickered across her face, the old Sierra flashing through, but there was no audience here, no one to laugh at my expense. No one pressured me into smoothing things over, just me and my answer, and the quiet, immovable peace I wasn't willing to give up for anyone. Sierra stood there, realizing finally that the door wasn't just closed, it had been locked behind her. And not out of hatred, out of love. For myself, for my son, for the life we'd built away from the wreckage she left behind. She turned without another word and walked out, the bell above the door jingling lightly as it swung shut behind her. I watched her, Go, I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just a clean, cool finality later that night. After closing up, Luca and I sat in the quiet shop, sharing a slice of leftover carrot cake. Mom, he said between bites, are we going to see Aunt Sierra again? I thought about it. Maybe, I said honestly, but we don't have to let everyone back in just because they show up at the door. He nodded like he understood, his little legs swinging under the chair, and I realized this was the real revenge. Not shouting, not fighting, not hurting. Her back, just building a life so full of peace, love, and laughter that there was no more room for her chaos anymore. And honestly, it felt better than any fight ever. Better than